Welcome to the Reforming Wisdom lecture in the science section on the historical perspective. As we have demonstrated previously, Genesis is not an actual manuscript compiled by an actual Moses, although that is who the authorship is traditionally given to. It is a multi-source compilation of manuscripts and stories, likely compiled between the 10th and 5th centuries BCE. Historically, or literally, we know precisely zero about the Garden of Eden or what came to be known as the fall of man. There are a lot of thoughts and theories, and any attempt to marry scientific knowledge to the third chapter creates further confusion and conflict. That said, it should be noted that a creation ex nihilo, or from nothing, is an unusual creation story. Most creation stories begin with something rather than nothing. The book of Genesis has a surprisingly large influence in medieval culture, whether it's our view of creation, our view of the power of God, our view of the methodology of God, or the role of women and the state of mankind. The science of history and the art of historical writing was central to the Renaissance humanists, which is why ad fontes, to the sources, was so critical to study. Many considered the stories to be anthropological philosophy rather than accurate history. They described the state of mankind and why and how we got there in a logical, reasonable way. Luther took this another step. He decided and was able to discern how it was both logical and illogical. The science of history and the art of historical writing was central to the Renaissance humanists. This is why ad fontes, or to the sources, was so critical to study. Many philosophers considered the stories to be anthropological philosophy, or the study of man and the study of thinking, rather than an accurate history. But ad fontes meant going back to previous scholars. Luther took this another step, a step that was both logical and illogical. Rather than comparing to older, more honored ancient scholars, Luther went to Scripture as the source, and faith as the means to distill this information. This became crucial in the establishment of a Lutheran theology in which our lives are that bridge between the Scripture and everyday interpretation. Influencing all of this was also the fact that Luther believed that he was living in the last days. He believed that the devil would not tolerate the rediscovery of the Gospels, that he, the devil, would repel with all his might and muster his forces against it. Luther's analysis of Genesis as the history of the church between God and the devil paints the primeval world of Eden as uncorrupted, not as an allegory, but as a historical fact. The history of the church itself and its use of the story of Genesis, the fall of man, and Eden also influence this thinking. The apocalyptic thinking of God versus the devil and the end times changed his motivation for doing this analysis well and in a godly manner. He also very much wanted to do something that was not allegorical. He needed to speak the plain truth so that people would be able to use this truth and live a godly life. As always, we have an unlimited number of questions to ponder, not just the basic question words: who, why, what. In order to give you a place to start, I offer 4 questions, but please do not limit discussion to just those 4 questions. We certainly can discuss many others. When we read Scripture, do we err in our interpretations, internal or external, on the side of historical facts, or divine truths, or something in between? If instead of thinking about things in an either or, black or white answer, what happens and what questions arise when we think in terms of relationships rather than historical events? Can we, as humans, neither divine nor devil, be the bridge between truth and fact? And what does that look like to bridge those concepts? What does it mean to you, if anything, to consider that Luther expected to fail? Luther believed that the end times would come before the truth of the gospel would be allowed to be rediscovered. How does this affect your faith today? What might this mean to you in terms of how the gospel speaks to you and to others? Does it change how you hear these words by looking at this image? Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning. If evolution is an ongoing, unfinished process, that is, change over time, is there a corresponding relationship to discovery, to beginnings, to ends, and to relationships?